My name is Ahmed Hassan. I'm 26 years old, and on September 3rd, 2023, I died for 18 minutes in a hospital bed in Cairo, Egypt. What I experienced during those 18 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the future of the world. I was raised in a devout Muslim family. My father was an imam at our local mosque, and I had memorized large portions of the Quran by the time I was 12. Prayer 5 times a day wasn't just a ritual for me, it was the rhythm of my life. I truly believed with every fibre of my being that Islam was the only path to Allah, and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was his final messenger. I worked as an engineer in Cairo, designing water treatment systems for rural communities. It was meaningful work, helping provide clean water to villages that had never had it before. My life was structured, purposeful, and deeply rooted in my faith. I attended Friday prayers religiously, fasted during Ramadan with complete devotion, and had even made the pilgrimage to Mecca 2 years earlier. That trip to the holy city had only strengthened my conviction that I was following the true path. The morning of September 3rd started like any other. I woke before dawn for Fajr prayer, had breakfast with my mother and younger sister Fatima, and headed to work. I was reviewing blueprints for a new water purification plant when the chest pain hit me like a sledgehammer. It wasn't gradual. One moment I was fine, the next I was on the floor gasping for air, clutching my chest as fire spread through my entire torso. My colleague Mahmoud called an ambulance immediately. The last thing I remember before everything went black was being wheeled into the emergency room, fluorescent lights flashing overhead, doctors shouting medical terms in Arabic that I couldn't quite process through the haze of pain. Then nothing. Complete darkness and silence. But then I wasn't in the darkness anymore. I was floating above my own body, watching doctors frantically working on me. I could see the heart monitor showing a flat line. I could see my mother arriving at the hospital, her face twisted in anguish as a nurse tried to explain what was happening. I could see everything, but I felt completely detached from it all, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. There was no fear. That surprised me more than anything. I had always imagined death would be terrifying, but instead I felt this incredible lightness, this profound peace that I had never experienced before. I tried to call out to my mother, to tell her I was okay, but I had no voice. I was pure consciousness, pure awareness, watching my own death unfold below me. Then I felt a pull, gentle but irresistible, drawing me away from the hospital room. I was moving through what seemed like a tunnel, but it wasn't dark. The walls were made of light itself, warm and welcoming, pulsing with a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the universe. As I moved through this tunnel of living light, I could hear something that sounded like music, but it was unlike any music I had ever heard. It was the sound of pure joy, pure love, harmonizing in ways that human ears could never fully comprehend. When I emerged from the tunnel, I found myself in a place that defied every description I had ever read or heard about the afterlife. It wasn't the paradise described in the Quran, with rivers of honey and gardens of endless fruit. It wasn't the heaven of Christianity with golden streets and pearly gates. It was something beyond all of those descriptions, something that could only be understood through direct experience. The landscape seemed to be made of crystallized light, shifting and flowing like water but solid beneath what I somehow knew were my feet, though I had no physical body. Colours existed here that have no names on earth, hues that penetrated not just through sight, but through every aspect of my being. The air itself, if it could be called air, was alive with presence and love so intense it felt like being embraced by the very essence of existence itself. That's when I saw him. At first, he appeared as pure light, brighter than 1,000 suns but somehow gentle on my consciousness. As he approached, the light began to take form, and I found myself face to face with a man whose presence radiated love, wisdom, and authority in equal measure. His eyes held depths that seemed to contain all of history, all of eternity, and when he looked at me I felt completely known and completely accepted at the same time. I knew immediately who he was, and it shook me to my core. This was Jesus Christ, the one Christians called their Lord and Saviour, the one my faith had taught me was merely a prophet, not the Son of God. But standing in his presence, there was no doubt about his divine nature. The love emanating from him was not the love of a created being, but the love of the Creator himself. When he spoke, His voice wasn't heard with ears, but felt directly in my spirit. It resonated through every part of my consciousness like the most beautiful sound imaginable. Ahmed, he said, and my name spoken by him carried weight and meaning I had never felt before. I know this is confusing for you. I know this challenges everything you were taught to believe. I wanted to argue, to defend my faith, to explain that I was a good Muslim who had followed Allah faithfully all my life. But in his presence, words seemed inadequate. Instead, I felt overwhelmed by questions that poured out of my spirit rather than my mouth. But I believed in you as a prophet. I honoured you as one of the messengers. Why am I here? Why are you here? What about everything I was taught about you? His smile was like sunrise breaking over a dark world. Ahmed, you honoured me as much as your understanding allowed. Your heart has always sought truth, even when that truth was filtered through human interpretation and tradition. I'm not angry with you for believing what you were taught. I am here because it is time for you to see what is real, what is coming, and what role you must play in the days ahead. But I don't understand, I said, my spiritual voice trembling with confusion and awe. My father taught me that you are just a man, a prophet like Moses or Abraham. How can you be here speaking to me like this? How can you be more than what I was told? Jesus stepped closer, and his presence intensified the love and peace surrounding us. Your father taught you what he believed to be true, just as his father taught him. Truth has been filtered through many lenses across many generations, but now you are seeing without those filters. You're experiencing me as I truly am, not as human understanding has tried to define me. He gestured, and suddenly we were no longer in that crystalline realm of light. We were standing on what appeared to be a high mountain, looking down at the earth spread out below us like a living map. But this wasn't just any view of Earth. This was Earth as it exists in both the physical and spiritual dimensions simultaneously. I could see nations and continents, but I could also see spiritual forces moving across the land, streams of light and darkness flowing like invisible rivers across the globe. Ahmed, Jesus said, his voice now carrying an urgency that made my spirit stand at attention. I have brought you here not just to reveal myself to you, but to show you something that is about to unfold on Earth. Something that will shake every nation, challenge every belief system, and fulfill prophecies that have been written for thousands of years. He pointed to a specific region on the map below us, and my spiritual vision zoomed in with perfect clarity. I was looking at the Middle East, at the land I had known all my life, but I was seeing it with new eyes. The land itself seemed to pulse with spiritual significance, as if every grain of sand carried the weight of divine purpose. Do you see that small nation there? Jesus asked, indicating a tiny sliver of land surrounded by much larger countries. That is Israel, the land I walked during my earthly ministry. That is the land where I was crucified and where I rose from the dead. And that is the land where prophecies written centuries before my birth are about to be fulfilled in ways that will astonish the world. I stared at the land below us, this tiny nation that seemed so insignificant compared to the vast territories surrounding it. But Lord, I said, using a title that felt strange yet completely natural coming from my lips. Israel has been nothing but conflict and war for as long as I can remember. My people, the Arab nations, we've been fighting over this land for generations. How can something so small, so disputed be central to God's plan? Jesus turned to face me fully and his expression grew more serious. Ahmed, what you're about to see will be difficult to understand at first. The enemy has worked for centuries to blind people to what is really happening in that land. He has stirred up hatred, division, and war to try to prevent what God has ordained from the beginning of time. Suddenly, the view below us began to change. I was seeing not just the present moment, but time itself seemed to be moving like pages flipping in a book. I watched as history unfolded before my eyes. I saw the ancient kingdoms, the conquests, the exiles, the returns. I witnessed the destruction of temples and the scattering of peoples across the earth. And then, like watching a flower bloom in fast motion, I saw something remarkable happen. In the year 1948, watch carefully, Jesus said. This is the beginning of the fulfillment of prophecies that were written over 2,500 years ago. I watched as Jewish people from all over the world began returning to this small piece of land. They came from Europe, from Africa, from the Americas, from Arab nations throughout the Middle East. It was like watching scattered pieces of a puzzle finding their way back to form a complete picture. But what struck me most was that these weren't just random migrations. There was something supernatural about this gathering, as if an invisible hand was orchestrating the return of an entire people to their ancestral homeland. The prophet Ezekiel wrote about this moment, Jesus explained, his voice filled with wonder at his father's faithfulness. He prophesied that Israel would return to their land like dry bones coming back to life, that they would be gathered from the nations where they had been scattered. For nearly 900 years, this seemed impossible. No people in history had ever been dispersed for so long and then returned to re-establish their nation. But with God, nothing is impossible. I watched wars break out around this reborn nation. In 1967, I saw a conflict that lasted only 6 days, but in those 6 days, something prophetically significant happened. The city of Jerusalem, which had been divided, was reunified under Jewish control for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. Do you see the spiritual significance of this moment? Jesus asked, pointing to Jerusalem as it appeared on the map below us. This is the city where I was crucified. This is the city where I will return. And this is the city that had to be back in Jewish hands before the final prophecies could be fulfilled. The scene shifted again, and I began to see not just the past and present, but glimpses of what was to come. I saw tensions rising throughout the Middle East. I watched as nations that surrounded Israel began to align themselves in ways that seemed to match ancient prophecies written thousands of years ago. Ahmed, your people, the Arab nations, along with other countries, are about to play a role in events that will shake the entire world, Jesus said, his voice heavy with both sorrow and determination. There will be a time of great conflict, a time when it seems like Israel might be completely destroyed. Many nations will come against her, and it will appear that she cannot possibly survive. I watched in horror as I saw massive armies gathering. I recognized the flags and symbols of countries I knew well: Iran, Turkey, Russia, and several African nations. They were forming an alliance unlike anything the world had ever seen, and their target was clear: the complete annihilation of Israel. But this is not just a military conflict, Jesus continued. This is the climax of a spiritual war that has been raging since the beginning of time. The enemy knows that Israel's role in my return to earth is crucial. He believes that if he can destroy Israel completely, he can prevent the fulfillment of prophecy and somehow thwart God's eternal plan. The vision intensified, and I could see the spiritual realm overlaid on the physical. Dark, twisted creatures moved like shadows behind the human leaders, whispering lies, stoking hatred, pushing nations toward a conflict that would consume millions of lives. But I also saw something else. Angels of light surrounding Israel, invisible to human eyes but very real in the spiritual dimension. The nations that come against Israel in those days will not just be fighting against a small country, Jesus said. They will be fighting against me, and that is a battle they cannot win. I watched as the conflict reached its peak. Just when it seemed that Israel would be overrun by overwhelming numbers, something extraordinary happened. The sky itself seemed to tear open, and I saw Jesus himself, no longer in the gentle form I was experiencing now, but as a warrior king, leading armies of angels in blazing white. "This is my second coming," he said simply. "I will return to the Mount of Olives, the same place where I ascended to heaven 2,000 years ago. And when my feet touch that mountain, it will split in two from east to west, creating a great valley. The battle will be over in an instant." I watched as the armies that had come to destroy Israel were themselves destroyed, not by nuclear weapons or conventional warfare, but by the word of Jesus himself. It was both terrifying and magnificent to witness the power of the one standing beside me. "But Lord," I said, my voice filled with confusion and concern, "what about all the people who will die in this conflict? What about my own family, my friends, all the Muslims who believe they are following the true path? Are they all condemned?" Jesus' expression softened with infinite compassion. "Ahmed, this is why you are here. This is why you have been chosen to see these things and return to tell others. The time of great conflict is approaching, but it has not yet arrived. There is still time for people to understand the truth. There is still time for hearts to be changed." He showed me something that brought tears to my spiritual eyes. I saw Muslims all over the world, in Egypt, in Syria, in Iran, in Indonesia, having dreams and visions of Jesus. I watched as they struggled with the same confusion I was feeling, torn between the faith they had been raised in and the undeniable reality of encountering the living Christ. In these last days, I am revealing myself to Muslims in unprecedented ways, Jesus explained, not because I reject them, but because I love them. Many of your people have hearts that truly seek God, just as you do. They have been faithful to what they believed was truth. Now I am showing them the greater truth. I saw former imams preaching about Jesus in secret gatherings. I watched as entire families converted quietly, knowing they faced persecution or even death for their newfound faith. But I also saw the joy on their faces, the same peace I was experiencing in that moment. Your role, Ahmed, when you return to your body, will be to bridge these two worlds. You will speak to Muslims who are having experiences like yours. You will help them understand that accepting me as Lord doesn't mean rejecting their love for God. It means discovering who God truly is. The vision shifted once more, and I saw something beautiful beyond description. After the great conflict, after Jesus had returned to earth, I watched as the world was transformed. The hatred between Arabs and Jews, the centuries of conflict and bloodshed, all of it was healed in an instant. I saw former enemies embracing like brothers. I watched as Palestinians and Israelis worked together to rebuild cities that had been destroyed. The artificial borders that had divided the Middle East for so long simply disappeared, not through conquest, but through a supernatural transformation of the human heart. This is what the prophets called the Messianic Age, Jesus said, his voice filled with joy. When I rule from Jerusalem, there will be no more war between nations. The weapons of destruction will be melted down and turned into tools for farming. Former enemies will travel freely between their lands, worshipping together, learning from each other, building together what they once sought to destroy. I watched children playing in the streets of Jerusalem, Arab children and Jewish children, laughing together without any awareness of the hatred that had once separated their grandparents. I saw the temple rebuilt, not as a symbol of division but as a house of prayer for all nations. Muslims, Christians and Jews gathered there together, united in their worship of the one true God. But Ahmed, Jesus said, drawing my attention back to him, what you must understand is that this beautiful future is not guaranteed simply because it was prophesied. Human beings still have free will. They can still choose to harden their hearts, to cling to hatred, to reject the truth even when it's revealed to them clearly. He showed me two possible timelines stretching out from the present moment. In one, the conflicts I had witnessed escalated beyond imagination. Nuclear weapons were unleashed across the Middle East. Millions died. In the space of hours, the hatred between peoples grew so intense that it consumed entire generations, leaving nothing but ash and radiation where cities once stood. This path leads to my return as well, Jesus said solemnly, but through judgment rather than mercy. If hearts remain hardened, if people choose war over peace, then I must come as a judge to stop the destruction before all life on earth is extinguished. In the second timeline, I saw something miraculous happening before the great conflict could begin. I watched as Muslims throughout the Arab world began having the same kinds of visions and dreams I was experiencing. I saw Christians and Jews recognizing their role in praying for their enemies rather than demonizing them. I witnessed political leaders from all sides being touched by supernatural encounters that changed their hearts overnight. This is the timeline I desire, Jesus said, his eyes shining with hope. A timeline where hearts are changed before the great shaking begins, where former enemies become allies before the final battle, where love conquers hatred through supernatural intervention rather than through the sword. I felt a burning question rise up in my spirit. Lord, which timeline will actually happen? Can you tell me what the future truly holds? Jesus smiled, and in that smile I saw both infinite wisdom and profound mystery. Ahmed, that depends partly on what you and others like you choose to do with what you have been shown. The future is not set in stone. It is shaped by the prayers of the faithful, by the choices of individuals, by the willingness of people to step outside their comfort zones and speak truth even when it costs them everything. He gestured, and I saw myself back in my earthly life, but now I could perceive things I had never noticed before. I watched as my father led prayers at the mosque, and I could see golden threads of light rising from the hearts of those who truly sought God, even though they didn't yet understand his full nature. I could see the genuine devotion, the sincere hunger for righteousness that motivated so many Muslims in their daily worship. "Your people are not my enemies, Ahmed," Jesus said gently. "They are my beloved children who have been given incomplete information about who I am. Many of them love God with a passion that puts many Christians to shame. What they need is not condemnation, but revelation." I also saw the Christians in my city, and I was surprised to discover that I could perceive their hearts as well. Some were filled with genuine love and compassion for Muslims, praying regularly for their salvation and seeking ways to build bridges of understanding. But others harboured fear and prejudice, seeing Muslims as enemies to be defeated rather than people to be loved. "The church must learn to love as I love," Jesus continued. "Too many of my followers have forgotten that I came to seek and save the lost, not to condemn those who are different from them. The great harvest of souls that is coming will require Christians to overcome their fears and prejudices." Then Jesus showed me something that made my spirit tremble with both excitement and responsibility. I saw myself standing before crowds of people, Muslims and Christians alike, sharing what I had experienced. I watched as some faces lit up with recognition and hope, while others hardened with anger and rejection. "Not everyone will believe your testimony, Ahmed," Jesus warned. "Some will call you a traitor to your faith. Some will say you were deceived by demons or that your experience was just a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen to your brain. But others will recognize the truth in your words because the same Spirit who brought you here will bear witness in their hearts." I saw myself meeting with secret gatherings of Muslims who had been having similar experiences. I watched as former imams and Islamic scholars wrestled with the same questions that were now burning in my own heart. I witnessed families torn apart by these revelations, but I also saw new spiritual families being formed as people who had encountered Jesus found each other and supported one another through persecution. "The enemy will try to stop this awakening," Jesus said, his voice growing more serious. "He will use both religious and political authorities to silence those who speak about these experiences. Some who bear this testimony will face imprisonment, others will face death, but their blood will become seed that produces an even greater harvest." I felt fear creeping into my spirit for the first time since arriving in this place. "Lord, I don't know if I'm strong enough for what you're asking of me. I'm just an engineer. I'm not a preacher or a prophet. How can I possibly stand against the opposition you're describing?" Jesus reached out and touched my spiritual form, and immediately courage flooded through me like electricity. "Ahmed, I am not asking you to do this in your own strength. Every word you speak will be given to you by my Spirit. Every door that needs to open will be opened by my hand. Every person who needs to hear your testimony will be brought across your path by divine appointment." He showed me a network of light spreading across the Middle East and beyond. Each point of light represented someone who would be touched by the testimony of those who had encountered him in visions, dreams, and near-death experiences. The network grew and expanded until it covered the entire globe. "This is the great awakening that must come before the end," Jesus said. "People from every tribe, tongue, and nation will encounter me personally. The harvest will be so great that it will require every believer, regardless of their background, to participate in gathering it in." I watched as this supernatural awakening began to change the political landscape as well. Leaders who had been consumed with hatred and the desire for war found their hearts softened by divine encounters. Military commanders who had been planning attacks instead found themselves seeking peaceful solutions. The trajectory toward the devastating conflict I had witnessed earlier began to shift as hearts changed one by one. "But Ahmed," Jesus said, his voice carrying a note of urgency, "the window for this kind of transformation is not unlimited. There will come a point when hearts become so hardened that only judgment can break through the darkness. This is why your testimony and the testimonies of others like you are so crucial in this hour." I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. The idea that the future of millions of people might somehow be connected to whether I had the courage to share what I had experienced was almost overwhelming. "Remember," Jesus said, reading my thoughts, "you're not alone in this. There are others like you being raised up all over the world. Former Muslims who have encountered me, Christians who are receiving new revelations about my heart for the Muslim world, and even some Jewish believers who are beginning to understand their role in the great reconciliation that must come." He showed me one final vision that took my breath away. I saw the moment when I would breathe my last earthly breath for real, not in a hospital bed, but as an old man surrounded by spiritual children from many nations. I watched as my funeral became a celebration attended by former Muslims, Christians, and even some Jewish believers, all united in their love for the Jesus I had encountered in this place. "Your natural death will not be the end of your impact," Jesus said softly. "The seeds planted through your testimony will continue bearing fruit for generations. Some who are hardened against the truth today will remember your words years from now when they have their own encounter with me." I felt a pulling sensation beginning to tug at my consciousness. The crystalline realm around us began to shimmer and fade slightly at the edges. "It is time for you to return, Ahmed," Jesus said, though his voice carried both sadness and anticipation. "Your body has been without your spirit for 18 minutes, but I have sustained it by my power. When you awaken, you will find that your heart has been completely healed. There will be no medical explanation for your recovery." "Lord, I don't want to leave this place," I said, echoing the sentiment I had heard from others who had similar experiences. "The peace here, the love, the absence of all conflict and confusion. How can I go back to a world filled with so much darkness and hatred?" Jesus' smile was filled with understanding. "You're not going back to the same world you left, Ahmed. You're going back as my ambassador, carrying a piece of this realm with you. The peace you feel here will remain in your heart. The love you have experienced will flow through you to others, and the truth you have witnessed will burn, like a fire in your bones, until it is shared with those who need to hear it." The pulling sensation grew stronger, and I could feel myself beginning to move away from him, though every fibre of my being wanted to remain. "Will I see you again?" I called out as the distance between us increased. "Sooner than you think," he replied, his voice growing fainter but no less filled with love. "And when you do, you will not be alone. You will bring with you a harvest of souls from among your people, trophies of grace that will bring joy to all of heaven." The last thing I saw was his face, radiant with love and approval, before everything dissolved into brilliant white light, and I found myself hurtling back through the tunnel at tremendous speed. The pain hit me like a freight train as I crashed back into my physical body. My chest was on fire, my lungs burned as they filled with air, and every nerve ending screamed with the shock of being alive again. The bright hospital lights stabbed at my eyes, and I could hear my mother crying somewhere nearby. A doctor was shouting something about it being impossible, that my heart had been stopped for too long, that there should be brain damage, but there wasn't. Within hours, every test came back completely normal. My heart showed no signs of the massive attack that had killed me. The cardiologist said he'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice. My family called it a miracle, and they were right, though they had no idea how much of a miracle it truly was. That was 8 months ago. Since then, my life has been completely transformed. I can no longer pretend that Islam has all the answers when I've met the answer himself. I can no longer hate Israel when I've seen God's plan for that tiny nation. And I can no longer stay silent when I've been given a message that could change the course of history itself. The hardest part has been watching my father's heart break as I've shared pieces of my experience. He sees it as betrayal, as abandonment of everything he taught me. But I've also watched his eyes when I describe the love of Jesus, and I know that deep down, his spirit recognizes the truth even when his mind resists it. I'm sharing my story now because time is running short. The visions Jesus showed me are already beginning to unfold. The alliances I saw forming are happening right now in the news. The hatred is intensifying, the weapons are being positioned, and the world is moving toward the conflict I witnessed. But it doesn't have to end in nuclear fire and judgment. There's still time for hearts to change, for people to encounter the same Jesus I met, for love to triumph over hatred before it's too late. If you're Muslim and you're watching this, please don't dismiss what I'm telling you just because it challenges what you've been taught. Ask Jesus to reveal himself to you directly. He's already reaching out to Muslims all over the world through dreams and visions. If you're Christian, please don't see Muslims as your enemies, but as people Jesus died to save. Pray for us, love us, build bridges instead of walls. And if you're Jewish, please know that the same God who brought you back to Israel is the one who sent Jesus to die for both Jews and Arabs. The future I saw was beautiful beyond description, but it requires all of us to choose love over hate, truth over tradition, and Jesus over everything else. My name is Ahmed Hassan, and I died for 18 minutes to bring you this message. Don't let it be in vain.